Dust settled over Oakhaven as the unmistakable roar of 50 heavy motorcycle engines shattered the quiet afternoon. Leather-clad giants bearing the infamous Death Head insignia claimed the local diner. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Until an unassuming 22-year-old waitress stepped directly into the path of their most ruthless enforcer. Heat radiated off the cracked asphalt of Highway 95, distorting the horizon into a shimmering mirage of desolation. Inside Arthur's rest stop, a dilapidated diner clinging to the edge of the Nevada desert, the ceiling fans lazily pushed around stale, grease-scented air. Clara Jensen stood behind the Formica counter, mechanically wiping down the surface with a damp rag. She was 22 with tired, observant eyes and hands roughened by years of double shifts. The diner was sparse this Tuesday afternoon. Only old Mr. Abernathy sat in his usual corner booth, nursing a lukewarm black coffee, while Arthur, the heavy-set owner, scrubbed the grill in the back. Then the low-frequency rumble began. It started as a vibration in the floorboards, a subtle tremor that rattled the silverware in their plastic bins. Within seconds, the tremor escalated into a deafening, thunderous roar. Clara paused, her rag freezing on the countertop. Out the grease-stained front window, a parade of gleaming chrome and matte black metal rolled into the dirt parking lot. Dust plumed into the air like smoke from a battlefield. Over 40 Harley-Davidson motorcycles, ridden by men wearing heavy denim and leather cuts, parked in a meticulous, intimidating formation. On their backs, the crimson and white winged Death Head was unmistakable. These were the Hells Angels. Arthur emerged from the kitchen, his face draining of color. He wiped his greasy hands on his apron, his breath hitching. "Clara," he hissed, his voice trembling. "Get in the back. Go to the stockroom and do not come out until I tell you. Understand?" Clara didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the men dismounting their bikes. They moved with a casual, terrifying confidence. These weren't Sunday riders. These were hardened men of the 1% outlaws who lived by a code written in loyalty, violence, and brotherhood. Leading the pack was a man who looked like he had been carved out of weathered oak. This was William "Iron Bill" Cassidy. A thick, silver-streaked beard covered the lower half of his face, and his arms, thick as tree trunks, were heavily inked with prison tattoos and club insignia. Beside him walked his sergeant-at-arms, Jackson Rev Miller, a lean, calculating man with a cold stare that seemed to catalogue every weakness in the room. As the heavy wooden doors of the diner swung open, the bell above it jingled a cheerful sound, completely at odds with the imposing figures filling the doorway. The oppressive heat of the desert spilled into the air-conditioned room, bringing with it the harsh smells of exhaust sweat and hot engine oil. The chatter in the diner, already minimal, died instantly. Mr. Abernathy shrank into his vinyl booth, lowering his eyes to his coffee cup, desperately trying to become invisible. Just coffee. Black. Leave the pots. Iron Bill ordered, his voice a gravelly baritone that demanded absolute compliance. He didn't look at Arthur or Clara. He merely pointed a scarred finger toward the largest cluster of tables in the center of the room. The other members filed in behind him, their heavy boots thudding against the linoleum, taking up space, claiming the diner as their own territory. Arthur scrambled to grab 4 glass pots of coffee, his hands shaking so violently he spilled dark liquid onto the warming plates, sending up sharp hisses of steam. "I'll take it to them," Arthur whispered frantically to Clara. "Just keep your head down." But Clara's heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wasn't looking at the patches or the intimidating scowls. She was looking at a silver Zippo lighter resting on the table in front of Iron Bill. It had a deep, distinct scratch, shaped like a jagged crescent moon across its casing. It was Caleb's lighter. Her older brother, Caleb Jensen, had vanished into the unforgiving desert exactly 82 days ago. The local police had dragged their feet, chalking it up to a young man running away from debts. But Clara knew better. Caleb had been prospecting for this exact charter. He had idolized these men, running errands, pulling security, and doing whatever it took to earn his full patch. Then one night, he left their small trailer to meet with Reverend Miller, and he never came back. The police wouldn't touch the Hells Angels. The townspeople whispered that Caleb had messed up, that he had skimmed from the club or disrespected the wrong member, and that his bones were now buried shallow out in the Sonora stretch. For 3 months, Clara had lived in a suffocating purgatory of grief and unanswered questions. She had tried calling the clubhouse only to be met with dead air. She had driven out to their compound gates only to be turned away by armed guards. Now the answers had walked right into her diner. "Clara, I said get in the back," Arthur hissed again, giving her shoulder a hard shove. Clara dropped the damp rag onto the counter. Her pulse roared in her ears, drowning out the low murmur of the bikers' conversation. She stepped out from behind the safety of the counter. "Clara," Arthur gasped, reaching for her apron strings, but he was too late. Every step Clara took across the faded linoleum felt like wading through deep water. The diner was unnervingly silent, save for the rhythmic squeak of her worn-out sneakers. As she bypassed the counter, heads began to turn. One by one, the Hells Angels ceased their quiet conversations. Pool cues resting against tables were subtly gripped. The casual atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a sudden heavy tension. Jackson Rev Miller noticed her first. He leaned back in his chair, his cold blue eyes narrowing as he tracked her approach. He subtly shifted his weight, freeing up his right hand, which rested near the heavy leather of his vest. Clara stopped 2 feet from the center table. She was 5'4", dwarfed by the leather-clad giants surrounding her. Her diner uniform, a pale blue dress with a white apron, made her look even more fragile in the sea of denim and scowling faces. But her jaw was set and her fists were clenched so tightly at her sides that her knuckles were white. Iron Bill Cassidy slowly raised his gaze from the coffee cup. He looked at her with a mixture of mild annoyance and cold curiosity. He didn't speak. He just waited, his massive presence commanding the space. "Where is he?" Clara's voice shook, but she refused to break eye contact with the towering president of the charter. A heavy silence descended. One of the younger members at a nearby table let out a low, mocking chuckle, but a sharp glance from Rev silenced him instantly. "I think you got the wrong table, waitress," Rev said softly, his voice smooth and dangerous. "We just asked for the coffee pots." Clara ignored Rev, keeping her eyes locked on Bill. She pointed a trembling finger at the table. "That lighter. The silver Zippo with the scratch. That belongs to my brother. Caleb Jensen." The name hung in the air like a dropped glass, shattering the fragile peace of the room. A few bikers shifted uneasily in their seats. Iron Bill's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. He slowly reached out his thick, scarred fingers, enveloping the Zippo. He flipped it open with a metallic clink, struck the flint, and lit a cigarette he pulled from his chest pocket. He took a long drag, exhaling a plume of blue smoke toward the ceiling. "You've got a lot of nerve walking up on this table, little girl," Bill finally rumbled. "Folks in this town usually have the good sense to look at the floor when we ride through. I don't care about your club, and I don't care about your rules." Clara shot back, the adrenaline overriding her terror. "Caleb rode for you. He bled for you. He was trying to earn that patch on your back. And then he disappeared. The cops say he ran. The town says you killed him and left him in the Sonora stretch." She took a half-step closer, slamming her small hand down onto the table, rattling the coffee cups. "You owe my family blood, Cassidy. I want to know where his bones are." Behind her, Arthur whimpered, practically melting into the floorboards. Rev stood up, towering over Clara, his shadow engulfing her. "Watch your mouth, sweetheart." Rev warned, his voice a lethal whisper. "You're speaking to the president. You don't make demands here." "Stand down, Reverend," Bill commanded quietly. Reverend hesitated, shooting Clara a venomous glare before slowly lowering himself back into his chair. Bill leaned forward, resting his massive forearms on the table. He studied Clara's face, looking for cracks, looking for the hysterical grief he was used to seeing in the relatives of the lost. Instead, he saw a furious, desperate fire that reminded him entirely too much of the reckless prospect he had taken under his wing a year ago. "You think we killed him?" Bill said, stating it not as a question, but as a fact. "Didn't you?" Clara challenged, her voice cracking for the first time. Bill sighed a long, tired sound that seemed to carry years of violence and exhaustion. He picked up the Zippo and tossed it onto the table. It slid across the formica and stopped inches from Clara's hand. "Pick it up," Bill ordered. Clara hesitated, then reached out and took the lighter. The metal was still warm from his hand. "Caleb ain't dead, Clara," Bill said softly, using her name for the first time. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her knees went weak, and she had to grip the edge of the table to stay standing. "But," Bill continued, his tone turning dead serious, "he's wishing he was." "What do you mean?" Clara breathed, the anger suddenly draining out of her, replaced by a chilling dread. "Your brother wasn't just running errands for us," Bill explained, his voice dropping so low that Clara had to lean in to hear him over the hum of the air conditioner. "He stumbled into something that didn't belong to the club. 3 months ago, we were moving a shipment of cash across the border. Clean money, legitimate club business. But someone tipped off the wrong people. Caleb was driving the scout car. He realized it was a trap." Rev leaned in, his cold demeanor replaced by grim seriousness. "He diverted the ambush, led them away from the main convoy into the desert, saved 3 of my brother's lives. But they took him." Clara's mind raced. Who took him? Why didn't you go after him? We've been turning the desert upside down, looking for him." Bill growled, a flash of genuine anger crossing his weathered face. "But the people who took him aren't a rival club. They aren't a street gang." Bill leaned closer, his eyes boring into hers. "It's Special Agent Harrigan, DEA. He's running a shadow operation out of the Las Vegas field office, stealing cartel money and pinning it on local charters to start wars. He has Caleb locked up in an off-the-books black site, torturing him to testify that the club orchestrated the theft." The diner spun around Clara. A federal agent, a black site, torture. The reality was vastly more horrifying than a shallow desert grave. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara whispered, her grip on the lighter, turning her knuckles white. "Why didn't you come to me?" "Because Harrigan has eyes on you, kid," Rev interjected smoothly. "If we approached you, he would know we were closing in on him. We couldn't risk it until we knew exactly where Caleb was being held." "And do you?" Clara demanded. "Do you know where he is?" Iron Bill slowly crushed his cigarette into the glass ashtray. He looked up at Clara, the hardened outlaw, evaluating the terrified waitress. "We got the location this morning," Bill said. "We ride at midnight to pull him out. But there's a problem." He paused, letting the heavy silence return to the diner. "Harrigan knows Caleb won't break, so he put a hit out on the one thing that would make Caleb talk." Clara's blood ran cold. "Me?" "Yeah." Bill nodded slowly. "You. The hit goes active tonight. That's why we're here, Clara. You ain't safe behind this counter anymore." He kicked a spare chair out from the table, the wooden legs screeching against the floor. Sit down. We have a lot to discuss, and not a lot of time before Harrigan's cleaners show up to this diner. Clara stood frozen, holding the silver lighter, the comfortable misery of her old life shattering into a million jagged pieces as she stared into the abyss of the criminal underworld. Shadows stretched long and jagged across the desert floor as the sun finally dipped beneath the jagged horizon, plunging Highway 95 into a suffocating darkness. Inside Arthur's rest stop, the cheerful neon beer signs had been violently unplugged. The Hells Angels moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency that transformed the roadside diner into a fortified bunker within minutes. Heavy oak tables were flipped onto their sides, barricading the fragile glass windows. The vintage jukebox, heavy with chrome and glass, was dragged mercilessly across the linoleum to block the rear kitchen exit. Arthur sat huddled in the walk-in freezer, clutching a rosary and weeping silently into a sack of frozen potatoes. Clara, however, refused to hide. If these men were riding to save her brother, she was not going to cower in the dark. "Take this," Jackson Rev Miller muttered, shoving a heavy cold piece of steel into her trembling hands. It was a snub-nosed .38 revolver. "Safety's off. Point and pull, but keep your head down until I tell you otherwise." Clara stared at the weapon, its weight pulling her arms down. She had never fired a gun in her life. 2 hours ago, her biggest concern was whether Mr. Abernathy was going to leave his usual 75-cent tip. Now she was standing shoulder to shoulder with the most notorious motorcycle club in America, waiting for a government-sanctioned hit squad to kick down her door. William Iron Bill. Cassidy racked the slide of a massive pump-action shotgun, the mechanical clack-clack echoing loudly in the silent, darkened diner. He took his position behind the overturned counter, lighting another cigarette. The glowing ember illuminated his scarred face, revealing a chilling calmness. These men were entirely in their element. Violence was not an interruption to their lives. It was a currency they traded in daily. Wyatt Dutch. Bill barked, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. "Take the roof access. They'll try to blind us with floodlights first. Shoot out anything that glows. Don't wait for them to say hello." 2 heavily tattooed bikers, carrying scoped hunting rifles, nodded silently and disappeared up the metal grate staircase near the bathrooms. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into a grueling eternity. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerators and the steady rhythmic tapping of Rev's combat boot against the floorboards. Clara crouched behind the thick steel of the industrial coffee machine, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Then it began. Headlights pierced the darkness, cutting across the dirt parking lot. But it wasn't the slow, sweeping beams of a lost traveler. 4 matte black SUVs with heavily tinted windows rolled to a synchronized halt, forming a semicircle that boxed in the Hells Angels' parked motorcycles. "Wait for it," Bill whispered, his eyes narrowing as he peered over the edge of the Formica counter. The SUV doors swung open simultaneously. Men clad in full tactical gear, Kevlar vests, night vision goggles, and suppressed assault rifles spilled out into the dust. They weren't cartel sicarios. They moved with the sharp, calculated precision of private military contractors. Special Agent Harrigan had sent professionals. Suddenly, blinding halogen spotlights erupted from the roofs of the SUVs, turning the front of the diner into a blinding wash of white. Before the tactical team could even bark an order, the diner roof erupted in gunfire. Wyatt and Dutch opened up their heavy rifle rounds, shattering the spotlights in a shower of sparks and falling glass. Plunged back into the dark, the mercenaries hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Iron Bill needed. "Light 'em up!" Bill roared. The diner exploded into a deafening cacophony of destruction. The remaining front windows shattered inward, spraying deadly shards of glass over the booths. Shotgun blasts roared from the Hells Angels barricades, tearing through the thin metal of the SUVs. The mercenaries returned fire, their suppressed weapons emitting terrifying high-pitched thwips that ripped through the diner's drywall and destroyed the overhead fans. Clara covered her ears, screaming silently as a barrage of bullets shredded the pie display case right above her head. Blueberry filling and broken glass rained down on her shoulders. She squeezed her eyes shut, clutching the revolver to her chest. "Flanking right!" Rev shouted over the din, popping up from behind a booth to fire 3 measured shots from a heavy-caliber pistol. A mercenary attempting to sneak around the side of the building dropped into the dirt with a heavy thud. The firefight was a chaotic, terrifying symphony of destruction, but Clara quickly realized something profound. The Hells Angels weren't just shooting blindly, they were protecting her. Every time a mercenary directed fire toward the kitchen area, 2 or 3 bikers would immediately lay down suppressive fire, forcing the attacker back into cover. Bill stood like an immovable mountain, taking chunks out of the SUVs with his shotgun, drawing the brunt of the enemy's attention. "They're falling back!" someone yelled from the roof. Clara peeked around the coffee machine. The surviving mercenaries were dragging 2 of their wounded back into the SUVs. Tires squealed against the dirt, kicking up massive clouds of dust as the vehicles threw it into reverse and tore out onto the highway, fleeing into the night. A heavy ringing silence fell over the decimated diner. The air was thick with the acrid smell of sulfur, burning rubber and pulverized drywall. Bill slowly stood up, brushing glass off his leather cut. He looked around his men. A few had superficial cuts and grazes, but no one was down. He turned his gaze to Clara, who was shaking uncontrollably, still gripping the revolver. "You did good, kid. You kept your head down," Bill said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He stepped over the wreckage and extended a massive, calloused hand to help her up. "Is it over?" Clara stammered, her legs feeling like jelly. Rev stepped out from the shadows, reloading his weapon with cold efficiency. "Not by a long shot. That was just Harrigan testing the waters. When those goons report back that a bunch of bikers repelled a tactical unit, Harrigan is going to panic. He'll scrub the black site and bury Caleb to cover his tracks." Clara's blood ran cold. "Then what do we do?" Bill racked his shotgun, ejecting a spent red shell onto the floor. "We don't wait for them to come back. We mount up. We're going on the offensive." Midnight swallowed Highway 95 as a pack of 40 heavily armed Hells Angels tore through the barren Nevada landscape. Clara rode on the back of Rev's custom chopper, her arms wrapped tight around his leather-clad waist. The freezing desert wind whipped against her face, but she barely felt it. Her mind was entirely consumed by the image of her brother, bruised and chained in some dark hole, waiting for a rescue he probably believed would never come. Their destination was an abandoned silver refinery, 60 miles off the main interstate, a rusted industrial skeleton hidden deep within a treacherous canyon. Bill's inside contact had confirmed this was Harrigan's playground, an off-the-books facility, where the corrupt DEA agent squeezed cartel runners and buried his mistakes. As they approached the canyon rim, Bill signaled the pack to cut their engines. They coasted silently down the steep, gravel-strewn switchbacks, letting the natural shadows of the canyon walls conceal their approach. Below them, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of sodium lights, sat the refinery. 2 armored SUVs were parked out front, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter fencing. "We go in quiet, take out the perimeter, and breach the main processing floor," Bill outlined, crouching behind a massive boulder overlooking the compound. He looked at Clara. "You stay here with Dutch. Keep your head down. When the shooting stops, we'll bring Caleb out." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to be the one to break down the door, but she knew she would only be a liability in a tactical breach. She nodded silently, gripping the revolver Rev had given her earlier. The angels moved like ghosts. Despite their massive sizes and heavy boots, they slipped into the darkness with predatory grace. Clara watched through a pair of borrowed binoculars as Rev and another biker dispatched the two gate guards with brutal silent efficiency, dragging their bodies into the shadows. Bill gave the signal. The main doors of the refinery were blown open, with a localized explosive charge that echoed through the canyon like a crack of thunder. Immediately the compound erupted into violence. Muzzle flashes lit up the rusted interior of the refinery like a strobe light. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. She strained her eyes, trying to see through the industrial smoke and darkness. "Don't worry about 'em, sweetheart," a voice drawled from behind her. Clara turned. Dutch, the lean, wiry biker assigned to protect her, was standing a few feet away. But he wasn't looking at the refinery. He was looking at her, and the barrel of his Glock 19 was pointed directly at her chest. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Dutch, what are you doing?" Dutch chuckled a nervous, ugly sound. "Making retirement plans, little lady. Sorry, but Harrigan pays in clean offshore crypto. The club's treasury is a joke compared to what the feds can seize and distribute." The twist hit Clara like a physical punch. Harrigan didn't just have an informant. He had a fully patched Hell's Angel on his payroll. Dutch was the mole. Dutch was the one who tipped off Harrigan about the club's money run. And Dutch was the one who led Caleb straight into the ambush to cover his own tracks. "You set him up," Clara whispered, her grip tightening on her hidden revolver. "You sold out your own brother. Brotherhood doesn't pay the mortgage." Dutch spat, stepping closer. "Now drop the piece Rev gave you. Harrigan wants you alive, but he didn't say in what condition. You're my ticket out of this desert." Clara's mind raced. Dutch was highly trained, a ruthless killer who had survived years in the underworld. She was a waitress, but as she looked into his greedy, calculating eyes, the fear that had controlled her all night suddenly evaporated, replaced by a scorching, white-hot rage. He was the reason Caleb was suffering. He was the reason her life had been torn apart. Dutch reached out to grab her arm. "I said drop the—" Clara didn't hesitate. She didn't close her eyes. She raised the heavy .38 revolver and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening at close range. Dutch's eyes went wide with shock. He stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder where Clara's wild shot had caught him. He cursed, raising his Glock to return fire, but a massive silhouette suddenly eclipsed the moonlight behind him. Rev's combat boot slammed into the back of Dutch's knee, snapping it with a sickening crunch. As Dutch collapsed, screaming, Rev casually kicked the Glock out of his hand and pressed the barrel of his own pistol against the back of the traitor's head. "Should have known a rat smells like one." Rev hissed, his eyes dead and cold. He looked up at Clara, nodding approvingly at her still-smoking gun. "Good girl. Bill's got the building secured. Let's go get your brother." Clara followed Rev down the rocky slope and into the cavernous, blood-stained refinery. Biker boots crunched over shattered concrete and the moaning bodies of Harrigan's mercenaries. In the center of the room, tied to a heavy metal chair beneath a blinding interrogation light, sat Caleb. He was severely beaten, his face swollen and bruised, but as he saw Clara walking through the smoke, a broken, bloody smile spread across his face. "Told you she was tougher than she looks," Caleb rasped, coughing violently. Standing in the corner, surrounded by 5 heavily armed Hell's Angels, was Special Agent Harrigan. His expensive suit was torn, and his arrogant demeanor had completely vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror as Iron Bill towered over him. "You can't do this," Harrigan stammered, holding his hands up. "I'm a federal agent. You kill me, the entire alphabet soup comes down on your charter." Bill leaned in, close exhaling cigarette smoke, directly into Harrigan's face. "We ain't gonna kill you, Fed. We're gonna do exactly what you did to Caleb. We're going to tie you to that chair, and we're going to anonymously leak these coordinates to the Juarez cartel lieutenants you've been stealing from. Let's see how well that badge protects you from a rusty machete." Harrigan's face drained of all color as he fell to his knees, begging, but the angels simply turned their backs on him. Rev cut Caleb's ties, and Clara rushed forward, throwing her arms around her battered brother, burying her face in his shoulder as tears finally spilled over her cheeks. The nightmare was over. As they walked out of the refinery and back toward the waiting choppers, the sky in the east was just beginning to bleed a faint, bruised purple. Clara looked at the formidable men surrounding her. They were outlaws, criminals and killers, but tonight they had been the only justice the desert had to offer. She mounted the back of Caleb's recovered bike, the engine roaring to life beneath them, and as they rode off into the breaking dawn, Clara knew she would never look at a leather vest the same way again. Did this incredible true story of loyalty betrayal and a sister's unwavering courage keep you on the edge of your seat? Drop a like, share this video with your fellow true crime and drama lovers, and make sure to hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, so you never miss out on our thrilling real-life deep dives. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? Comment down below.